Hey guys, and welcome to a brand new project announcement video. And in this video, we will be discussing the brand new project that I am starting called Stardust Engine. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Stardust Engine is basically going to be a 2D and 3D game engine for the PSP. It's going to feature multiple support for basically 2D and 3D gameplay, alongside a bunch of other features, including an editor that will make everything very easy and user-friendly. Getting into it, basically what's going to be done with the Stardust engine is that we're going to be creating something similar along the lines of Unity for the PC. Unity is very simple and easy to approach, and it has a fully featured editor which allows you to make a game completely just using the editor without having to do too much coding work outside of that. And what coding does need to be done is very simplified in a standardized API. So the goal of Stardust is to make a 2D 3D game engine for the PSP that's really easy to use. And this is because I'm trying to basically attempt to get a lot more developers onto the PSP, using a lot more simpler programming languages and things that people can understand, rather than necessarily having to be completely from scratch using C or C++. Of course, the program will obviously be built in C++, and there will be multiple ways of actually using the Stardust engine. However, it is very easy for you to be able to actually make your own games with Stardust engine. This being said, I am trying to encourage basically anyone who is interested at all in development in basically using the Stardust engine once the project has reached its completion goal. You don't really have to have much of a coding background or much of a background in computer science at all. It's just got to be some overall general computer skills that you know how to use a computer. Furthermore, I will be highlighting projects that people make, and basically we can probably do something on the Discord server where people can share their own Stardust Engine projects on the Stardust chat inside of the PSP Homebrew Discord server, which is of course always in the description. I can do recap videos and show people what's going on in the community and try to basically raise public awareness of this. Furthermore, I'll also be offering people help and things like that to do as well. I'll also be making a tutorial series on this channel on basically how to use Stardust Engine and how to basically make your own games and ports or whatever you want to on your PSP within a very short amount of time. So without further ado, I'm going to start to cover the basics of the actual engine itself. The engine itself is going to be multi-platform, so you could possibly be creating games on the PC. But for right now, it's going to be PSP only, but that will be changing after the initial 1.0 release. And this 1.0 release is the only release that is going to really become public, as there is no real reason for me to show you a release that is halfway built, because it really doesn't make sense for most developers. Upon completion, it's going to be basically made up of a lot of different things, but we're going to start off by doing the platforming, things like that. Then we will be moving on to math, utilities, and a bunch of other stuff that we're going to be needing, such as networking, event management, input, scene management, and things like that. Then we're going to start implementing the game engine core, which is going to be somewhat similar to Unity. So the main core of the engine is going to be the scene. The scene is basically the level that you're currently on, and then it's going to store all the details of what's inside of that scene. Inside that scene can be game objects, and game objects can be basically literally anything that you really want. Game objects support having components on top of them, and once you add components to a game object, it can have various different functions. For example, if I add the audio source component to any sort of a game object, that source object will now start emitting sounds. Furthermore, there's hierarchy to this, so you can basically be making parent game objects, child game objects, and doing a lot of work like that, as well as basically getting the child and parent components off of those game objects as well. The scene will overall manage everything that you really need to have in your game, and a lot of it can be pretty much automated, and a lot of it is very simple to deal with. Furthermore, then we'll be working on scene management and things like that, which will allow us basically to have multiple scenes within a game, and it will also allow you to export those scenes to basically a file and be able to load them from a file, which will make it a lot easier. And this is kind of the basis of the actual game engine itself, is that once we do an editor or something like that, it's going to be exporting to a scene file, which is going to be interpreted by a slightly specialized program using the Stardust engine. After we have this solid base implemented, we'll then begin doing things like profiling, which are just basically ways to optimize the way that the engine is going to work and to see what is taking the most time out of your game. Then finally, we will be adding things onto the game that actually affect the gameplay itself, which will be like rendering. So rendering is going to start with the 2D engine first and doing basically 2D objects, sprites, tile maps, and things like that. That'll allow you to basically create your own 2D scenes. There's going to be some special things having to do with that. We're also going to add the UI as a component, and we're also going to do things like 2D controllers, so being side-scrolling or top-down, and obviously that comes with physics that will be used in the game as well. Furthermore, in general, we're going to be adding animations, which are going to store keyframes and about any sort of serialized data value that is provided by the engine, so therefore you can actually have things that turn on and off, have different events and things like that. That'll basically determine what happens. Furthermore, we will then be moving on to 3D rendering and things like that, which is going to have to deal with actual 3D models, meshes, and things like that. So you can easily import meshes from basically any sort of real 3D object file, which is helpful so that you can actually just make a bunch of your things in completely separate programs like Blender and stuff like that before you actually start moving it into the actual game. So the coolest feature of this is going to be the post-processing engine, which is going to be running on the media engine. And what it's going to do is it's going to take a rendered texture, which is going to be your entire frame buffer or the entire screen, and then it's going to be applying post-processing effects to that. Now, that's something that doesn't really happen much on the PSP, and you don't really see much post-process effects other than very simple things that you can do with particles and other effects like that. Using this, we can probably do a lot of color working, basically tone mapping, doing some LUT, doing brightness contrast, gamma contrast, HSV colors, and color correction for that as well. Alongside, we can also begin doing some more physically based things like the way that the camera works, physically based cameras, things like that can also help. We can also do motion blur probably, alongside potentially looking into things like depth of field, God rays, and a bunch more advanced features. So after all of that core engine componentry is done, basically we're going to be creating the different ways of using the engine. There are three primary ways that you're going to be able to use the engine. The first is going to be as a C++ API, which I will be creating, and it's actually pretty simple to use. It's basically just taking the engine and making it into a library instead of an executable. The second way that we're going to be able to do it is going to be using a scripting sort of API, which is going to allow you basically a fully scripted version of the entire game engine, which is similar but not the same as the way that the editor will work. And finally, the editor is going to be the easiest and also sort of the longest taking project that we're going to be doing for Stardust Engine, which is going to take a reasonable amount of time, but allows you to basically completely make the application within a single application. This way, it's going to be a lot easier for anyone to make a game, and it's going to be a very good tool for creating games on the PSP. So as with this, please let me know your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. I already have a reasonable section of the engine already sort of finished, and I'm also projecting that the engine will be done probably mid-summer, potentially earlier or potentially later, depending on the course of development. So please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later with a brand new project announcement for a completely different project too.